Hi students, in this video we're going to look at how to calculate trigonometric values using the unit circle. So after watching this video you should be able to know the four quadrants of a unit circle and the sign, so whether the trig ratios are positive or negative, and their symmetry properties in those quadrants. That's what we'll talk about today, those special symmetry properties. And also write an angle in terms of its reference angle in the first quadrant and use that to help with calculating its value. So some things to recall. We have to remember our lesson on the unit circle and how we use it to calculate trig ratios of different angles using the x and y coordinates of that point on that circle. We should also know the sign of each trig ratio in each quadrant. So using those letters ASTC, we use all stations to central to help us remember which trig ratios are positive in which quadrant. So in the first quadrant, all the trig ratios are positive. In the second, it's just sine. In the third, just tan. In the fourth, just cos. All right, so looking at this diagram, we can see that the following angles, so let's say we've got an angle here, theta, and we've got another angle here, we'll call that phi. Both of those angles have the same sine value. We can see it because just reading it off the graph, they both have y values of 0.5. So both sine of theta and sine of our other angle phi, they're both equal to each other because they've got that same y value. Now, funnily enough, I just know this angle here is 30 degrees and this angle phi will be 150 degrees. Now looking at our diagram here, we can say that this angle here must be 30 as well. Right? So if they've got the same y value, it makes sense that the angle that this light blue line here makes with the negative x-axis should be 30, the same that the purple line makes with the positive x-axis. So what we can say then is that this angle 30 will help us work out the sine, cos, and tan values of our angle 150. That value is called a reference angle. So that reference angle is an acute angle, so less than 90 degrees, that relates our larger angle to some value that's in the first quadrant. So that 30 value we can use to help calculate trig values. And it's useful because it's a small enough angle that it's in that first quadrant. Now, to make sure those values are correct, we might add a positive sign or a negative sign at the front, depending on which quadrant it's in. So for example, in this situation, right, we're in our sine quadrant. So the cos of 150 degrees, our angle all the way around, funnily enough, we'll still use our reference angle. It'll be the same as cos 30, but in this quadrant, sine is positive and only sine. So cos must be a negative value. So we can say that cos 150 is actually the same value as negative sine 30, where 30 is that reference angle. It's that acute angle that takes us to the x-axis. All right, so students, what we're going to do in these examples then is use reference angles to help us simplify our trigonometric ratios and the values that we're looking at. So what we're going to do before we start looking at these problems, finding sine, tan, and cos of these angles, let's label our graph first. So we've got 0 degrees here on the right, 90 degrees on our y-axis, 180 degrees over here, 270 at the bottom, then we get back to 360 on our positive x-axis. I'm also going to add in our letters to help us remember which trig ratios are positive in which quadrant. So we've got all in our first quadrant, stations to central. in each of our quadrants. So all positive in the first, only sine positive in the second, only tan positive in the third, only cos positive in the fourth. All right, now let's do some work here, sketching these angles and working out the value of their trig ratios. So we've got sine 300, right? So 300 is going to be here. Imagine that line straight. And there's our angle, 300 degrees. Now our reference angle is our acute angle that gets us to the x-axis. So that's this angle in here. That's our reference angle. And we can work it out just by doing 360 for our full circle, subtract 300 degrees, 60 degrees is our reference angle. So sine 300 is going to be related to sine 60 degrees. Now we do have to work out whether or not it's going to be positive or negative. So looking at where we're located, 300 degrees is in our fourth quadrant. Only cos is positive there, so sine must be negative. So what we can say then, in terms of simplifying, sine 300 degrees is actually equal to the negative value of sine 60. And we've expressed sine 300 in a much simpler sort of way there. All right, let's do our next one. Let's do tan 190. We'll do this one in blue. So 190 degrees might be about here. And so that there is 190 degrees. Now this time our reference angle will be this one here. This is the acute angle that takes us to the x-axis. And just looking at that, if our angle is 190, 180 is over here on our x-axis. That leftover angle must only be 10 degrees. So tan 190 will be related to tan 10 degrees. Now we need to work out the sine. All right, 190 is in this third quadrant where tan is positive. So in this case, we can leave our answer as it is. Tan 190 is equal to positive, or just regular, tan 10. All right, our last one, looking at cos 110. Let's do that one in purple. So 110, 90 is up here on our y-axis. So this one here might be 110. And our reference angle won't be the angle at the top. Right? It's not the angle to the y-axis. It's the angle to the x-axis. So from 110 to 180, our reference angle will be 70. It's a bit hard to read. Let's just do this one in white. So cos 110 is going to equal something like cos 70. Now looking at our diagram and the quadrant it's in, 110 is in our S quadrant, in the second quadrant, where only sine is positive. So the cos value then must be negative, because only sine is positive in that quadrant where 110 is. And so that's how we use our unit circle and our sketches to help us simplify the trig ratios of certain angles. Right, so after watching this video, you should be able to know the four quadrants and use symmetry or reference angles to help us simplify those trig ratios.